My name is Nicole Hansen. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And on this channel, we're learning to pattern our lives after the holy order and pattern of God as we see in his temple patterns. And today, what we're going to talk about is a topic that I love. And most people know this about me. I love the rainbows. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. I've been excited to get to this point in our discussions on the rainbow, but we've had to kind of build up some concepts. If you're new to this channel, every video I do builds upon itself. So you'll get something out of this, but probably not as much as if you go along and take some keynotes, because it all kind of builds upon itself. So a lot of the things we've done before, you've seen in kind of my recent videos, I'm starting to intertwine a lot of those concepts together. So we're going to really hit that today with the rainbow. The rainbow is the token of the everlasting covenant. We'll get into that in a minute, where we see that in the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 9. And okay, so how I want to start this is I kind of want to tell you my personal experience as to why this became so important to me, why the rainbow. It's to the point now I'll have friends driving out and they'll see a rainbow, and anytime there's a rainbow, I'll get 30 people texting me like, this reminded me of you, this reminded me of you, and which is great, but it's supposed to remind us of Christ, and we'll get into that in the end. But I'm glad that people are, because it's become so important to me, that other people are starting to see, oh yeah, there's something going on here. And so I'm hoping to just kind of point that out more, and hopefully help that token set in your heart a little bit more. Tokens are, we know from the temple how important tokens are. And so just a reminder that this is a token of the covenant. And so it is a very sacred symbol. And as I've been able to find, and at this point, this is just my own opinion in searching scriptures, this is one of the most sacred tokens I've been able to discover inside the scriptures. So we're going to try to talk about it with a lot of reverence and give it the justice that it really deserves. So how this began for me, this was, well, like most people, a lot of things probably started to happen in our minds in 2020. And in 2020 sometime, one night was in my sleep, I kept hearing this word over and over again in my mind, in my sleep, and the word was cherubim. And I woke up and it kept saying that word in my head, like in the back of my mind. And then when I finally realized, hey, why did I keep replaying this word over and over again in my head, and started to pay attention, at the time in 2020, I didn't really even know what a cherubim was. I even asked that night. So all these things I'm going to tell you happened within a matter of a few days of each other. So at some point after hearing this word in my mind, I remember going to a friend's house and I brought it up. I said, what is that? What is cherubim? And they said, oh, you know what that is? That's, talk about in the temple. It's, and, it's on the Ark of the Covenant, and the two little, winged birds on the Ark of the Covenant, and the guards the way to the tree of life. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's why it sounds familiar. But I still didn't really know what it was. I know, honestly, to this day, I still don't really know, but I know a lot more now than I did. And so I thought, okay, this sounds right. So why am I hearing this in my head? And I believe it was the same day. So actually, well, within a day or two, I had come out of my master bedroom, and in our family room, we have these windows, big windows, and right outside my windows was this huge rainbow, as if it was right in the street outside my house. And it was so close. And I turned to my husband to go find him to say, "Dad, come look." And when I turned back, it was gone. I was like, I've always heard that happens. When you come to the end of the rainbow, it disappears. Anyway, it was like I was right at the end, and I witnessed it, and I turned around and it was gone. And I was like, where'd it go? And I heard a voice say, "Pay attention. That was just a message for you." And so, okay. So it's just the voice in my head. Okay, I don't know what to think of that. And then I think it was that night that I had asked my friend, "What is cherubim?" So you said this was all within a day or two. And then one of those nights I was upstairs on my deck outside off my master deck, and that's where I would go read my scriptures every night. And I was reading, and I think we were in the Book of Mormon that year, and Come Follow Me. And I again heard this voice say, "Get up early in the morning to study, and you'll be given more spiritual treasures." And so I got up the next morning at 5 a.m. I went outside to the same spot on my deck. And for some reason, I opened in Moses, which is not normal for me. I always start in the Book of Mormon and then try to do other studies from there. But I always try to start with the most correct of the word, get my center in the word, and then go from there. But for some reason this morning I started, or maybe I did. Somehow I ended up in Moses, and that's not a typical place for me to like go very much, especially at the time. Maybe now it is, but at the time it wasn't. And I came across the word cherubim. So obviously I'm like, oh, there it is. And I had my phone, and in the app, if there's a footnote, you can just click on it. And so I just clicked on it to follow kind of the footnote, and like, yeah, I want to know more about the cherubim. So I clicked, and it took me to all these footnotes. And I'm going to be honest, I couldn't relay how I got there. But as I was clicking on the footnote, I somehow came across another rainbow, a word rainbow in the scripture somewhere or something, that then was like cherubim and the rainbow. So then I started following that, because that had word come to my mind, and then I had seen that rainbow. So those two things were connecting in my mind. I thought, okay, rainbow. And I kept following until at some point I ended up on the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 9. And I'm going to read that here in a minute. But this completely changed my perspective of the rainbow. And up until this point, all I had ever heard about the rainbow was it was given to Noah as a promise that the Lord would never flood the earth again, which is true. If you go to Genesis 9, that's what we have on it. But the JST translation, he adds a whole other section he adds more to that, and it's italicized what Joseph Smith adds there. And the other thing I had heard about it was, well, it's a symbol that when the rainbow's taken in that year, then that as long as you see the rainbow, the Lord's not coming in that year, and something to that effect. And that was kind of the typical hearsay of what the rainbow is. And to this day, I'll ask people, what does the rainbow mean? And that's the same answer I get. But like, nobody really knows where. It's just kind of like, well, yeah, that's what I've heard my whole life. And so this was the first time I'm like, wait a minute. This is not what I was taught about the rainbow. There's a whole lot to this rainbow. And I don't remember hearing any of this anytime, even today when I ask people. There's not, although I feel it's changing. I think people are going through experiences like I had. And I'll tell you why I think I had that experience. Because I think that is the promise that God's fulfilling at this time. So I'm going to read this again. So when I've tried to find this, it's actually kind of hard to find in my phone. I just go into the church app, I type in Rainbow in the Covenant, and it comes up. Because how I found it, I didn't even know how I got there. And then when I tried to find it again after that, I had a real hard time going back trying to find it. And in the end, it took those two words, Rainbow Covenant, and then it came up. So I don't think it's an easy find. And maybe God makes it that way on purpose. I don't know, but this is what it says. We'll just read it. God sets the rainbow in heaven as a reminder of his covenant to Enoch and to Noah. In the last days, the general assembly of the church of the firstborn will join the righteous on earth. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant, which I made unto thy father Enoch, that when men should keep all my commandments, Zion should again come on the earth, the city of Enoch, which I have caught up unto myself. And this is mine everlasting covenant, that when thy posterity shall embrace the truth and look upward, then shall Zion look downward, and all the heavens shall shake with gladness, and the earth shall tremble with joy. And the general assembly of the church of the firstborn shall come down out of heaven and possess the earth, and shall have place until the end come. And this is mine everlasting covenant, which I made with thy father Enoch. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will establish my covenant unto thee, which I have made between me and thee, for every living creature of all flesh that shall be upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant, which I have established between me and thee, for all flesh shall be upon the earth. And when I read those words, this is the token, that just hit me really hard because of, we know the value of tokens and what a token this is. And so, okay. So when I read that for the first time, I still keep getting more and more out of that every time I read, but the first time I read that, I'm like, wait a minute, what? This is what the rainbow, this is not at all just the things, yes, it was given right at the beginning. God sets the rainbow in the heaven as a reminder of his covenant to Enoch and to Noah. So Joseph Smith is adding a whole nother person in here that this covenant was made between Enoch. And so that changes everything. So if you pull it up, you can see the italicized things that were what Joseph Smith had added on in his translation. And everything that he added on applied to Enoch. And Joseph Smith had been known for saying, Enoch came before the flood, I have come before the fire. Okay, and so just think about this in relation to Joseph Smith's mission in life, to prepare the world for the fire when Enoch was there preparing the world for the flood. I just think that makes the work of Joseph Smith exponentially more powerful in my mind. So let's walk through this a little bit. We'll kind of come back to this as we go, but okay, so he tells us that he will remember his everlasting covenant. So here's one thing that I'm just gonna go through what I didn't know before and assume that a lot of people fall into this category. This was also given to Enoch, so that's number one there. Another thing we talked about, this just in the chapter heading here, in the last days, the general assembly of the church of the firstborn will join the righteous on earth. When we went through, I think it was DNC 88 in Doctrine and Covenants class, our teacher who was teaching that day, he asked a question and he said, as we're going through DNC 88, he said, what stands out to you in this section that you have never even heard of before? And I'll be honest, I hesitated to even say anything. I don't even think I said anything. because there was so much that I'm like, a lot. And people pointed out so much of kind of the same idea of the rainbow. Like, well, there's actually a lot of stuff in here, which I've never even heard of before. But what I want to point out, and what I was too chicken to say at the time, but I'll point out here, is the General Assembly of the Church of the Firstborn. I'm not going to go into that, but what that is described in Doctrine and Covenants 88. And I kind of wonder, has anybody else ever even heard of this before? Or if we do we just in our mind think, well, that's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? In Doctrine and Covenants 88, it clearly tells us it is the celestial. And so that's not what we are yet. And here in this section, it is telling us that that is the city of Enoch, that they will come down to be with us. And so it's not the same thing. And so I'm not sure if other people pointed that out and just were too chicken to say anything too, like I was, but that's one thing that I felt when he asked that question. I said, well, I mean, at that point I had known what it was, but prior to that, years prior, I had never even heard of that before. And it gives us a very clear definition in DNC 88, what that is. And so I won't go into that. I'll let you guys study that. But in this JST, it does tell us, so this is the covenant which I made with the father Enoch, that when men should keep all my commandments, Zion should again come on the earth, the city of Enoch, which I have caught up unto myself. Okay, so we know what happened to the city of Enoch. And I'll go through a couple of my brain rewritings I had to go through in regards to the city of Enoch. Okay, the city of Enoch, I always thought they were all translated at one time. It was just like a translation that just happened, what the Christian world would call like a rapture. And which actually I think we have more doctrine than anybody of the truth of a type of rapture. But I think it's just greatly misunderstood, because when I read the Old Testament for myself for the first time and went through, what stood out to me was it did not happen like that. It was over a process of hundreds of years. And as people were ready, the angels would come and take them up. And so that was a new paradigm shift for me, that it wasn't just like, boop, it was a process. And if we think so much about how President Nelson is telling us, if you think the gospel has been fully restored, we're just at the exponential phase of things. Now, he said that in a temple dedication in Chile. And, but that was something that brought a lot, I think, of eye-opening to a lot of saints, was that the restoration that Joseph Smith brought is similar. It was not just an event. I mean, there was an event that began it, and then things began to unfold from there. And it's been a process over hundreds of years. And now President Nelson saying we're just hitting the exponential phase. So things are quickening. Again, what do we associate the word quickening with? Translation, which is what happened to the city of Enoch. Okay, it's a quickening. And so I kind of viewed maybe what happened with the city of Enoch was they, like a rainstorm, you get like a raindrop, and then another raindrop, and then another, and then suddenly it starts to speed up, right? The power starts to grow and it starts to speed up until they're all where they need to be. And then the flood. That's actually the rainstorm. That's like a perfect symbolism right there. And then the flood. And if you weren't up, you were in. But okay, so can we apply that today? Actually, this is working out perfect. Can we apply that today with light and the fire and the rainbow being that symbol? So we'll get into the light of the rainbow, the actual kind of physics of the rainbow, and the light being a symbol of the fire that will come. And when there's some writings about when Joseph Smith was translating the Book of Mormon, he was being persecuted, they had to take on alias names. And the name that he chose was Enoch. And I just think it's so interesting how much he compared himself to Enoch. And then here we're being given what was the promise to Enoch. That I have so many directions I want to go right now, because Elder Eyring, he just listen to him. He obviously has a deep connection to this concept. He talks about the city of Enoch a lot, and these people, and I being that we'll hug them and they'll hug us, and we'll follow upon Women's Conference fall of 2020. I think listen to his talk there. Okay, so it says, Zion should again come on the earth, the city of Enoch, which I have caught up unto myself. And I think Elder Eyring mentioned this in his talk, that, they were taken up, but this time they will come down with us. And as we come up to the level of them, essentially is what this is saying. And then verse 22 says, and this is mine everlasting covenant. Okay, so take everything that when I learn new information, I don't like, oh, that negates everything I knew before. Everything you know about the everlasting covenant, and now plug it into this understanding, and it just expands and enlightens those other things more. Because we talk about this in certain ordinances of the temple. And so think about that next time you go. Think about these verses, that when thy posterity, and this is mine everlasting covenant. And then he goes on to explain here that when thy posterity, so he's talking to Enoch here, Enoch and Noah, that when thy posterity shall embrace the truth and look upward, then Zion shall look downward, and all the heavens shall shake with gladness, and the earth shall tremble with joy. And the general assembly of the church of the firstborn shall come down out of heaven. Again, read the beginning of D&C 88, where it describes the church of the firstborn. And they will come down out of heaven. I mean, that makes sense in connection to that scripture. And possess the earth, and shall have place until the end come. And this is mine everlasting covenant, which I made with thy father Enoch. So he's saying, this is a covenant that I made to Enoch. He's talking to Noah at this point. This is the covenant which I made with Enoch. And the bow, well, let's stop there for a little bit. I mean, just in context with the general assembly of the church of the firstborn, that just brings a lot of power to this verse. And then again, read Elder Eyring's talk. It just brings a lot of power to what he is saying in that talk. And then here it says, and shall have place until the end come. And so I don't know which end are we talking about. Maybe that's, well, they'll have place. Actually, I think that's meaning the end of the millennium, until the end come. So they'll come down and have place. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will establish my covenant unto thee. And again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, if that's the ending when Christ comes in that and is all glory. But if we read in Jacob 5, there's a difference between the burning of the wicked and the burning of the vineyard. And so keep that in mind. Those are two different events. And I think it's the last two verses of Jacob 5, 75 and 76, where he kind of adds more. It almost seemed like he was done, but then he added more. And those verses are specifically in relation to the end. And so I would assume that that's what this verse is talking about here, verse 23. Okay, and so anyway, sorry. And verse 24 says, and the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will establish my covenant unto thee, which I have made between me and thee for every living creature of all flesh be upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and thee, for all flesh shall be upon the earth. Actually, that's kind of hidden me in a new way, in respect to like the resurrection. All flesh, including those that were taken up, will be upon the earth. That general assembly of the church of the firstborn will be one in flesh. So there's a whole lot of that means more than I can comprehend at this time, but you're welcome to add your insights and thoughts there. But mostly want to point out, this is the token of the covenant. This is a token and a symbol of what God promised to Enoch, what happened to the city of Enoch. And then if we take that in relation to what happened with Joseph Smith and the flood and the fire, both are baptisms, baptism of water, baptism of fire. The earth itself has to go through that. We've talked about that in previous videos. If you want to plot those things, if you want to take the earth itself and plot it on that temple diagram, again, if you're new to this, you'll have to kind of go back and watch the videos on the temple diagram. But if you want to plot the earth itself in its journey and reaching the measure of the fullness of its creation, we see that it's going through the same pattern. It goes through a baptism of water, and then we'll go through a baptism of fire, and then in the end receive its paradisical glory and become as a Urim and Thummim. And so that's kind of a pattern we see through all the scriptures happening to each prophet or being as they go through. They have baptism of water and fire. They have symbols that symbolize these things unto the Urim and Thummim and the crystallization of the earth or the mind and the spirit, and becoming celestialized, that is of a celestial order. So again, that probably makes no sense if you haven't watched the last videos, but if you have, hopefully that's starting to sink in and make a little bit of sense there. Okay, so just a few things I really want to point out there. Obviously with me, it was like, I couldn't have made this up. I mean, for myself, for me to know that this was something very important to the Lord. It wasn't like I read a book and it was in there. I had this experience of in my mind hearing this, literally seeing something that only God could have put in front of me, and like literally nobody else could have placed the rainbow in front of me. Only God himself could have done that. And so this is going to probably speak to a lot of you, especially those I know who comment a lot on my channel and are having experienced these experiences yourself. Hopefully this is giving you more context of what God is doing in your life. Only he can put that rainbow in front of you. And then of course I have to ponder on that myself and think about it, listen to the promptings, follow through. And then by the morning, and I was told I would be given more spiritual treasures. And this is one of the biggest spiritual treasures I've been able to find. And I'm going to tell you why, because it has led to a connection with God through Christ that I otherwise would not have. And that's exactly what he's saying is the promise, that you will have that connection through Christ. When we go to the temple, we learn this. You will come back into the presence of the Father through Christ and have that connection. And this is the symbol of that. And so it is a very sacred symbol that we hold very sacred and very dear and talk about with severe reverence. And you can see one of the things I really want to point out in the wording here in the scripture is that when they see if I can find it again, that when we look up, Zion shall look down, that when men shall keep all my commandments, Zion should again come upon the earth, that when thy posterity shall embrace the truth. And who is the truth? Christ. And look upward. And look upward. Then Zion look downward, and all the heavens shall flood with gladness. That as we look up, that what are we looking up? I mean, you have to look up to look at the rainbow. And but also a symbol of looking up towards Christ, looking up towards the heavens, looking beyond this world, that connection will then again happen, this returning back to God through Christ. And we're going to get into a lot here with that, get a little bit more specific with that. But a lot of symbolism today. I just felt like the promise here is, I had somebody, I think I read a book where somebody described this, and this book was recommended to me after this had happened to me, but they described that like this connection with Enoch was that the people there were so righteous that they desired and longed to see the world in its righteous state. And God essentially saying, well, that's not going to happen today. That's not going to happen in this dispensation, but it will happen. And I promise that it will happen. And I promise that you will get to be a part of that. And that when it does happen, you will get to be a part of that, and you will get to be one with them. Enoch and Zion, Enoch of Noah's day, Zion of our day, that we will get to be one. And that when that happens, you will get to be part of that. And this is the token I'm going to give you of that promise, that this will happen. And that token is that they'll look up and they'll remember. And he described it as and I know this to be true because this happened to me, that when you look up and you see the rainbow, that it will just impress on this generation, that it's just going to impress on our minds and our hearts what it means. And that happened to me. I looked and I saw it and I didn't know what it meant. And then I was guided to this. And then I knew more than I had known, but it began to impress. Again, it became a process of restoring and truth and embracing the truth. And when it began to impress, well, I'll tell you more of the story here. In fact, I might have to go. I'm just going to keep telling you the story because this is the exact promise that God is saying. My people, this symbol is going to impress ideas and things that are going to connect them back to me through Christ. And in heart and mind. So what began to happen to me after that was, well, a few years prior, so this was probably like 2017, 2018, somebody pointed out to me the symbolism of 7. We'll talk more about this today too. But that we see 7 is obviously a sacred number. We know that, a symbol of Christ and perfection. Symbol is the number of perfection, and 10 is the symbol of completion. So 70, you get perfect completion. So 7 is that perfection, being perfect in Christ. And so we see throughout all the doctrine of Christ, we have 7 dispensations, 7 seals, 7 churches in the book of Revelations. That's how it begins. It talks about 7 churches in the Book of Mormon. We have 7 days in a week, 7 days of creation. There are 7 sevens everywhere. There's 7 keys and a scale on the piano, 7 scales on the piano. There's 7 main ordinances in Christianity, but also, now I'll get into this a little later, but also that seems to have held true in a lot of other cultures. Most other cultures and the truths that they follow have 7. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit when we bring it all in. So I'll come back to the ordinances and things. And so I had been clued into and somebody had described to me, and let your mind think about this for a while. I won't go too deep into this, but in the book of Revelations, in fact, somebody might need to look this up because this was just in a class that I was told, so I don't know for certain. But that the 7 churches are one higher, and this would make sense, one higher geographical location than the other. Kind of like the Jordan River is the lowest point on earth where Christ was baptized, or the lowest point in that valley where Christ was baptized, symbolizing we put the baptismal font at the bottom of the temple. And then the book of Revelations begins with this pattern of 7. And so this idea of 7 being a real symbol of ascension, we have Jacob's ladder, which had 5 rungs on the ladder, and then you had the top, which above coming off Christ, and then the bottom, which would be where you need the baptism at, and then you step onto the ladder and climb up. So a total of 7 there. And then he saw the angels working up and down. So, and then Isaiah, he breaks it. You can break his structure down into 7. So Isaiah kind of starts writing based off the concept of Jacob's ladder. And then he goes in and builds these literary structure of 7 based off the ladder, symbolizing these levels of ascending upwards. So essentially ascending upwards towards Christ, perfect in Christ being 7. Now we know there's different meanings for different numbers, but in this life, in our goal of getting to Christ and getting through that veil through Christ, 7 is that part of the journey. And then there's eternal progression past that. And I think a lot of things that symbolize that, but we're going to talk about 7 today. Because once we get to Christ, then he, as we see in 2 Nephi 31 through 33, no more doctrine shall be given until Christ shall manifest himself to you, and then he will give you the rest. And so that is our goal, is to reunite with Christ, who then reunites us with the Father. And so so one day, okay, I'm going to tie 7 and the rainbow in a lot today, so we're kind of getting 2 different things right here right now. But one day I was cleaning the house, and my daughter was like, she was like 2.5 at that time in 2020. And so I had already grown a love for the rainbow in this experience that had happened to me. But then my daughter, she said she was watching one of her kid shows one day, and it was like a music show, and they used the colors to show scales on the piano, which is the correct way to do it. She gets a lot of distorted rainbows from like, oh, there's only 5 or something from school, and they only color 5 or whatever. But I think it's really important to get the 7, because the 7 speaks to your mind in a pattern that you can then see its connection to all of creation. So I try to teach her, when I see like things all fit in God's creation in nature. And so she had it in the musical thing, and she said, Mom, you know that there's 7 colors to the rainbow? And I'll be honest, I did not know that. But I had this experience, cherubim and the rainbow and all this. Oh, I'm reading this and starting to understand this was something he said would connect us back to the city of Enoch. This is the city of Enoch, were translated beings, and we're to be one with them again. This is a symbol of very, very beautiful promises. And so when she said, do you know that it has 7 colors? I was like, no, I didn't know that. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, 7 colors. And then my mind started to realize the power of God in all of his creation. And we'll get into a little bit of how it ties into our ability to connect back to God here in a minute. Throughout this video today. But just hold on to that right there. I'm going to continue my story, but I started to connect it to music and to everything at that point. So when she said that, it impressed more on my mind that I didn't know. So the first experience I had where I came to read this Genesis 9, after I had seen the rainbow and heard the voice for myself, it impressed on me. And then this was probably a month or 2 later, she said that, and then it impressed more on me. And then as I continued this journey, I learned a few other things. I learned that the rainbow, I actually don't know all the physics here, but somebody was saying that if you were like up in a helicopter, from a helicopter point of view, sometimes you can see it and it's actually a full circle, not just the half. So it's a symbol of perception and seeing things clearly as they truly are, which is a symbol of celestial, being able to see things as they truly are. And one day we will come to that. So the rainbow is actually a symbol of, like, if you look through a camera and you can see that circle, that rainbow, a perception. Our eyes actually are, this I do know, I studied in anatomy, they're like a, what do you call that, a projector. And so you see like a flipped image, your eyes flip an image. And so, we're all flipped upside down in this world. In the celestial, you see things as they really are. And that's part of the promise, that we will see things as they truly are. And so I'm like, this, at that point, when I learned that sometimes they can see it as a full circle, it made me think of looking through a looking glass or a lens and seeing things as they really are. So then it began to impress that celestial idea in my mind, and questioning myself, am I truly seeing the way Christ sees things, people, situations, the world, and unifying in God in that way that, we would have a clear perceptive image. The other thing is that in certain conditions, we get the double bow. And so you have two rainbows that are a reflection of each other. So the colors go in order this way, but on the next, you have reflection and refraction. And so you get the refraction from the water, and then they paint it one way, but then the next rainbow is a reflection of that. And so the colors actually go in the opposite. So it's like a mirror image. And so just think about mirrors and how important mirrors are in the temple. And we use that as symbology a lot. And I'm going to come back to that mirror image. And then, so you have, so this began to impress on me. So then you have one for Enoch and one for Zion, two rainbows, two bows in the sky, with that reflection process. And then I learned from somebody gave me a quantum physics book for babies. And I don't remember if this is where I learned it or somewhere along the way, that talked about when all the colors are in perfect resonation and frequency together, because you have a whole spectrum of color, right? But when they're all in that perfect resonance together, that they create pure white light. And so blackness is actually the absence of light. And these colors are light, and they come together, and then it's like a diamond. All this light reflects through there, and you can see the colors glistening off, but together they reflect full white light. And if you go in the celestial room, you can see those crystals and the light coming through. You can see all the colors in there, but at the same time, the crystal itself is that full white light. And then think of Christ again as that pure crystal of light, and or like a prism where the light comes in and reflects outward. And I think it was in that same conference talk Iron gave to the women in 2020 fall that he said, he said it, I think it was that one, but kind of quoted that, we shall see him for we shall be like him. Okay, so keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that. How does this apply to us? How do we apply it to actually becoming like him, to house all this color so that we produce and reflect the pure white light of the one above, and be like another prism shooting out more light for others to also see the light and guide back to the source. So the rainbow is obviously, we see the rainbow because it's light. It's light. You can't fake that rainbow. It's light. So this is kind of my journey through the most of this all happened in 2020. It just kept impressing on me, like, oh my goodness, white light, will see him for we'll be like him. And then I started to learn how that applied to our physical tabernacle and the physical element, and then how we can apply that physically to the promised blessings of what it represents. And so that's a journey, I think, for everybody to discover for themselves and to pray about and learn about. But then let's see, this was the last summer. Okay, so last summer is 2022. So this is a couple years later. I was, and I'm not gonna say what I was pondering on, because I want to keep this lighthearted, but and sacred without going too deep. But I was pondering on some things, and well, what I will say is there's a lot of darkness going on in the world around us, and just trying to figure out if I was in the right spot, where the Lord needed me to be, and if I was in the right place at the right time, I guess, and in doing what he wanted, because it just seems like there's so much darkness around, and like, do you want me to just move to the middle of nowhere like Lehigh did, and take our family and just go? I don't know what to do. I don't know. I just want to do what you want, and I don't know what that is. But I was just feeling really down about like I don't know if I can make a difference where I am. I don't know if it matters, if things are too far gone, if you're coming soon, if what is happening. I think a lot of people probably have these feelings, for one reason or another. We've all felt this. And we were driving. We always get like, there must be something special about Idaho, because every time we drive to Idaho, I have the biggest aha moments. And we were in Idaho for a week with my husband's family, and on the way back, I was really pondering. My husband's brother had a home for sale across the street, and he's like, you guys should buy it. And we had such a fun week up there with his family. His brother and his sister live in the same ward, and then his other brother and sister and mom all live on the farm together in a different ward just an hour away from them. So everybody's really close, and I'm really close to them all. And I love being with them. They have a unique spirit about them. And we just had such a good week. I'm like, maybe we're supposed to move. Maybe we're supposed to be here with them. It just feels great. And where I was, I felt like there was a lot of turmoil spiritually. Not like on the surface, but just spiritually. It felt like my friend Matt Jepson, that's been on here with me, him and his wife, they often joke, but I think kind of serious, like, if you could move the veil, you would see that's like spiritual New York City here. There's a lot of good and evil going on. There's just a lot going on, and I feel like you can feel that. Where when I went to my husband's family, it just didn't feel like it was in the air. It just felt really peaceful. Maybe that's because I wasn't used to that area, but they didn't seem bothered by the spiritual warfare. I'm like, okay, so what's going on? And on our way home, we were reading. So last year we were studying in the Old Testament, and we were studying a lot about covenants, and everything in the Old Testament is covenantal language, which I love. It just helps. There's a reason God gave us that first, to set us into then the New Testament, and then the new covenant, the book. He did these things in order, right? We have 3 main books of doctrine there for a reason. And but he really sets up the pattern in the tabernacle in the Old Testament. So it's a lot of covenantal language. And we were reading about the covenant, and I don't remember where we were at, but as we're driving home, we're listening to Come Follow Me that week. Me and my husband, our kids are asleep in the back. Actually, my son wasn't born yet, but my daughter was asleep in the back, and we're driving around. We come around this bend, and there was this rainbow. And it was not like a typical rainbow. It was like both of us went, like, it was, I've never seen a rainbow like this. The vibrance of the rainbow was like out of this world. I couldn't find anything to describe. Of course, I tried to take a picture, but I couldn't do it. There was nothing that could capture the reality of this rainbow. And it was a low bow. And because it was a long range, there's a beautiful mountain in the back, and the ground was so green and misty. It was just a scene of nature. There was no houses, no nothing. It was just open road, misty meadow, this rainbow that went flat across, and this beautiful mountain in the background. And it was like, took your breath away. And I literally like, what is the deal with this rainbow? And it was there for like 20 minutes of us driving, and we just stood as we're listening to the covenant that, whatever we're listening to, come follow me. I was so stunned by the rainbow. All I knew was like the covenant. I heard what God wanted me to know in that moment. And it was like, I told my husband, I'm like, do we need to pull over and like walk through that? Because I'm pretty sure like if we were to walk through that right now, we would come out the other side of heaven. It was like, there's something there, like, the lens, you just walk through it, and then somewhere over the rainbow, right? And the things, the world takes the truths and tries to minimize them, but in the end, no, it's more powerful than you could have ever minimized. And the bow was so vibrant in color, and the mist of the water coming up, it was sheer white. It was as white as the shirt I'm wearing. It was, I did not intend that today either, but it was, I had never seen so much white under a rainbow before, or never noticed, but this was like bright white. Those colors were. And we just said, I've seen rainbows before, but I've never seen a rainbow like that before. And my husband and I talked about that. And then in that moment, I knew what the Lord needed me to know. And this was the message I got from all the commotion that I was feeling and the loudness of the world that I was feeling. As he said, if you hadn't learned, if you hadn't been put in a place where the voice of the world was so loud, you would not be able to hear my voice so loud and clear. And that was a symbol of him speaking to me and told me, you're where I need you to be. I need you to stay there. And so for the time, we're staying where we are until we're told to leave. But it was one of the most clearest times I've ever heard his voice. And we're going to connect the hearing and seeing, hearing his voice and seeing him through the rainbow here as we go forward today. But for me, that was just a really strong experience. And this all started, just the rainbow continually. Again, in this moment, I needed an answer, and I didn't expect it to come so loud and so clear. And I would have missed it had I not spent years working on developing this this connection, and to know in that moment what the rainbow meant. And so the story gets better. So we went that week. My husband and I kept bringing it up over and over again, and I started to notice people were posting all over Facebook rainbows, like big double rainbow. Oh yeah, this one we saw also had a double. And people were posting all online these double rainbows that they were seeing. And I told my husband, like, what is going on? People were saying, the things that people were saying is what caught my attention, because it was the exact same thing my husband said. They were literally writing in their comments, I've seen rainbows before, but I've never seen one like this. And to the viewer looking on Facebook, seeing a rainbow, it just doesn't capture what the person's saying. So you're just, oh yeah, that's a cool picture. And there might be something like it's positioned cool or something. But I think what the person was saying and trying to convey was, no, I've never seen a rainbow like this vibrant before. And that was what my husband and I said, like, I've seen rainbows before. I've never seen one like that. And so I noticed, I said, Tad, I showed him on my phone, people, I'm like, this keeps happening. All week, people were showing stuff like this. And I said, do you think that the Lord is trying to communicate something to us? Do you think that he is fulfilling his covenant? Do you think that this is what this is a symbol of? Is that he's fulfilling that covenant? And, okay. I'm actually getting this a little out of order. I think throughout that week, I just said, do you think he's trying to communicate with us? And then one day during that week, as my husband and I were pondering on, like, we kept bringing up, like, what was the deal with that rainbow? My husband just randomly said, what's the deal with that rainbow? And so I said, and I just kept saying, I think he's trying to communicate with us. And I don't fully know what he's saying yet, but I think he's trying to communicate something. Then one day that week, this woman, she's not even an active member anymore. She hasn't been for 40 years. And this actually, a previous video I did, this connects to the power of I told the story about a freeze dry. I'll have to get on and tell the story in its fullness someday. But this woman we got in connection with through doing the mission of the emergency preparedness through our ward, and she engaged with us through that, her and her husband was anti-religion at all when we started, and then as of last year he was singing in the ward choir. And so there's a power going on that we're seeing, and it's all diverging here at this rainbow for me. And this woman, she showed up at my door one day, hasn't been active for 40 years, and she just randomly, she's never showed up at my door like that before. She just randomly says, she said, I have some bad, she said, I just want to come talk to you. I've had some bad news. I have to get my toes amputated because she has diabetes, and she needed to get them removed before an infection went through. And this is something she's dealt with her whole life and was kind of born with it. And and so she just said, I just was feeling so awful after I got the news from the doctor. And she said, I didn't want to go home. And she's like, I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I didn't want to go home. And she's like, and then I felt I just needed to go to my office. And she hadn't been working in her office because since COVID, so she hadn't been there in years, or very rarely had she gone. And she said, I just felt like I needed to drive over my office. And so she drove over to her office. Mind you, she just showed up at my doorstep and started telling me this. And she said, and I haven't told her anything. And she said, Nikki, when I turned around the corner towards my office, she said there was a rainbow right over my office. And she said, her own words, I have seen rainbows before, but I have never seen one like this. And she said, as soon as I saw it, I just felt this hope inside that everything was going to be okay. And she, so she's telling me this story, and I'm like jaw dropped. She just said the exact words that people have been posting that I said, I've seen rainbows before, but I've never seen one like this. And she said, I just felt like it was a message to me that everything would be okay. And she said, I don't know if the rainbow was put there because I was going there, or I needed to go there to see that rainbow, but I just know I needed to see that rainbow. And this was in June of 2022. And she said, I just felt so much hope that it's just going to be okay. And I'm looking at her. She has no idea. She has no idea that God is communicating through her to me in this moment. And I really didn't know what to say. I shared with her a little bit of my experience and said, hey, Dad and I had an experience of that just last week. And I kind of shared with her a little. And I said, yeah, the rainbow, there's just something very special that seems to be going on with the rainbow. And she And so she left, and she had to get surgery that week, a quick surgery. And anyways, she left that day. Let me get back to that day. So I walked in. My husband just happened to be home for lunch that day. And I told him, I said, Tad, you will never guess what just happened. And this was coming from a woman who hadn't been active in 40 years, right? But I can see that something was turning in her. Something was changing, and has been for she's become a really good friend of mine. And I came in, I told my husband, I said, what is going on? And he said again, yeah, something's going on with this rainbow. And I said, she said the exact same words. And then this is when I told my husband, at this point, I said, he's definitely trying to communicate. That's an answer to me. He's definitely trying to communicate to us. And I said, do you think that he's trying to tell us that he's fulfilling this covenant? Do you think that that's what this is about? I said, I feel very strongly that's what this is about. And we sat there and talked about it for about 30 minutes while we ate, about how we think that God is trying to communicate to us that he's fulfilling his covenant through these rainbows. And then my husband walked out, went back to his office for work. And right when he walked out, I sat down in this chair under my fireplace mantle, which you know the importance of that mantle to me in previous videos, but sat down, and as soon as I sat down, I'm not going to pull it up because I don't know where it is, but as soon as I sat down, my friend sends me a text. She lives across the street from the new Saratoga Springs Temple. And she sent me a text and said, Nikki, you will never believe what just happened to me. And she said, I was putting my daughter down for a nap, and I had this prompting that I need to go open the blinds and look through the window. So I did. And I turned around, opened the blinds, and looked through the window. And this is what I saw. And she sent me a picture of what she saw. And it was a double rainbow going over the temple. And that's the one that I use as the intro picture to this video. There's no way that this friend could have known what the conversation just was with me and my husband. And I just asked, are you trying to tell us that you're fulfilling this covenant? And I went and sat down under that mantle, which the Lord placed in my home. And he sent me that message. And that was the first time in my life where I felt that God himself was speaking to me in the way that we only learn in the temple. That through Christ, through this perfection of Christ, that we can connect and communicate back in the presence with the Father. And that's exactly what this is a symbol of. So do I think it's very important that my daughter gets it right? That there are 7 colors to this rainbow. And that this is a connection back to God. And a token is, some people think it's silly that I put so much emphasis on that. But I can't deny the voice that I heard. And in that moment, when I sat there in that chair, and she sent me that picture, as soon as I looked at the picture of his rainbow over the house of God, this token of the covenant over the place where we make covenants, I simply heard, yes. So why do I want to share that? Because it's quite obvious to me that a lot of people are having very sacred experiences that are similar, because people are posting things and maybe adding some emphasis to what may be happening. And I've had friends
another friend shared one where he was from one temple to the other. He could see the rainbow going from one to the other. I've had a lot of dreams. I won't share my dreams, but I've had a lot of dreams where I could see the temple inside the rainbow. And that would have specific meaning to me and what was being communicated there. But people are seeing this and having this, and I have had friends drive through the street and they'll see my house and a rainbow going straight into it and take a picture and say, hey, I know you love the rainbow and I'm sure this means something to you. And it does. In that moment, I know what the Lord is saying. When somebody feels impressed to send me a picture of that, I have learned to communicate with him in that way. And other people starting to have those same experiences where they see that. And recently, the one that's really stood out to me one week, this pattern, I've noticed all these people seeing these rainbows over the temples, and just beautiful. But one thing that stood out to me a couple weeks ago was I was starting to see all throughout 1 week specifically, I kept seeing all these pictures. Somebody had sent one directly into my home, and a couple of my other friends had seen them going into their home from whatever vantage point they were looking at, right? Their perception was what they were seeing, and it was just, they had never seen that before. Again, back to that perception and being aware of things we've never seen before. But I started to notice that there's a pattern going on here, is these rainbows aren't just going over now, but this week it seems like everybody's posting them going directly in the center of the temples. These rainbows were going directly into the center of the temples and in the center of people's homes, which is a temple. And then portray that as your body is the temple as well, and that light reflecting through you, through your home, through the temple, through your community. So, okay, that was all a long discussion to explain to you why I think the rainbow is so important. It's just from personal experience. You have your own experiences, but okay, now we're going to talk about a little bit about the symbolism here. I might come back to some of that if there's something I want to share, but I forgot. But I ended up that day sharing the JST translation because my friend has been inactive for years, but she knows Joseph Smith. Her family's all members, she knows. And so I ended up sharing with her. I told her what happened after she left my house and my husband came in and we talked, and I sat down and saw this. By this point, about an hour had gone by, and I have never felt God speak to me so clearly. I couldn't help but tell her what had happened. And I shared with her, and she just said, wow. And ever since then, when she sees a rainbow, she sends it to me. And I think this is restoring hope. She felt hope. And now every time she sees a rainbow, she feels hope. And she feels connected to others who are feeling the same hope. And now she may not have a full understanding of that covenant. I don't think any of us really do, but there's a new level of hope there. And what is potentially being restored to us right now at this exponential point of restoration. And what we are actually in and witnessing right now, not just waiting for something to happen, but witnessing. One other thing I want to say about that in relation to the covenant, I started working at the temple recently, and another ordinance worker has kind of pointed some symbolisms out to me, but the ancient wedding tradition was, one of the symbolisms they pointed out was that there's a lot that we're going to talk about, the veil of the wedding, the veil, the bride, and the bride being Israel, and the veil coming off of Israel. And when in ancient Jewish tradition, when the veil would come off, typically, well, based off what we see in, I think it was Jacob who got the wrong wife, or he wanted the one wife, but he ended up with the other sister. But he didn't know it until after the wedding was fully consummated, because at the time the veil didn't come off until the covenant was fully consummated. The covenant was complete. And so that's just the symbolism I want to point out in relation to the rainbow and the token, and the question that I pondered on, and what that all means. So hopefully this is all very sacred things. And so for you to ponder on yourself, go to the temple, think about it, pray about it, ask for understanding. And it just keeps impressing. Like I said, I don't know everything either. I just know that things are impressing. This light and knowledge is being given, and we are being endowed with light and knowledge as we participate in those things in the temple work. Okay, so going into 7. Okay, we went over some of the symbolism of 7. I'm trying to remember what I had written down I want to talk about. We went over all the symbolisms of the reflection. Okay, I think what I want to talk about is because what we're relating all this to is becoming a temple ourselves. And so being made eventually like Christ of pure light, that pure light that reflects white light, and how that happens within us. Here's some other things that impressed on my mind as I discovered this scripture. And I don't have a lot of background in all this, so this is going to have to be things that everybody ponders on and thinks and maybe can comment on. But I have a little bit of insights that came to me as I was studying this. But well, I'm going to go back to when I was studying in college. I was at Snow College for a couple years, and in one of my physics classes, I remember the professor, he was a member, and he told us that when a frequency is created, it can never be destroyed. And then he tried to compare that to the first vision. And he said, imagine that first vision, it's on a frequency somewhere, a wavelength somewhere. It exists. It happened. Time and space are so different outside of our world. It happened and it exists. That first vision, it exists. And I thought about that. And so technically, if that's the case, anybody could see it. It exists out there. And so I went home from that class thinking, whoa, like, well, then what does that mean? And I got thinking, well, just like a radio, if anybody could tune in, they could see, if you can tune to the right station, you could see it. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, but only Joseph Smith could have the right tune that he needed to be to see that. And it took me about 20 years before this revelation began to really take part, and where it began. So for 20 years, I would tell people, yeah, you're like a radio, and if you could, anybody could see that, but only Joseph Smith could see that. And for 20 years, I said that to people. And then when President Nelson told us, he told the women, study the Oath and Covenant of the Priesthood, D&C 84, D&C 25, and I know I referenced this a lot because I think he said, if you did this, and the first vision, if you did these things, the next conference would be memorable and unforgettable. Well, at that point, I was expecting like the Kirkland, Ohio temple dedication, the heavens were going to open, it was going to be, and but I remember that day of that spring conference, the one that was memorable and unforgettable. I told my husband, I said, what do you think he meant? And he's like, do you not feel like the veil's been removed? And I was like, oh yeah. And just over my mind. And I said, yeah.
And then what now, 3 years later, what has happened in my life since then is like, okay, clearly that was a memorable and unforgettable moment. I just at the time couldn't see it for what it was. But okay, so back to the frequency that anybody could see this for 20 years. I'm like, anybody could have that experience, but actually only Joseph Smith could, because only he was the right man for the job to be tuned to that. And while I was studying on the first vision that time, I had one of my parents' friends text me. I'm gonna have to ask her what it was she sent me, because I don't know where it came from. It was writings from President Nelson from something. I think it was an Ensign article, or I was not good enough at keeping these. So I'm just gonna tell you what happened, and you decide how you feel about this. But all this time, at the time, I was also reading, because he had told us to study about the women, to study about the priesthood. So I was also reading a book about women in the priesthood. And in this book, while this is what I was reading, so I was in the process of deeply studying the first vision, the Oath and Covenant, D&C 84. At the same time, I'd been in that process for a couple of months. And then I was specifically at a point in a book that's about women on the priesthood, how the author was comparing, like, we look at the priesthood, it's kind of like the earth, and you can look at it like you can pick up the dirt and call it earth, or you can look at the globe and call it earth. And she's like, a lot of times we look at the priesthood as the dirt and we call it priesthood, and we're missing the bigger power. And right as I was reading that, this friend of my parents, who has never once sent me anything before, ever, on this stuff, ever. I only talk to them once every couple of years when I see them. She texts me out of the blue and texts me an article from President Nelson. Again, I don't have it on me. I don't remember where it was or what it was. I actually haven't read it since. I just remember he was referencing the first vision. Maybe somebody else knows what I'm talking about. He was referencing our need to study the first vision. And then I was, for whatever reason, as I'm reading this book and realizing, oh my goodness, I've been looking at it as dirt and not the world. I specifically came to this moment in time in my physics class and the first vision, when he said, imagine the first vision. And for 20 years, I'm saying, oh, nobody could have that experience. And as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I was totally looking at that as dirt and not the greater power of what, because I'm reading D&C 84. D&C 84 is the power to hear him and see him, and his power to manifest the Father to you. And I had been looking at it like this, and I just felt the Spirit say, you've been missing that was a seed. And now your understanding is a tree, that I have something much bigger for you to understand. And right at that moment, as I'm pondering on this friend of my parents who never texts me, sends me this article from President Nelson, who's referring to the first vision. And these words stood out to me. And he said, he has a vision for you. And I finally knew what had been planted in me 20 years ago was a lot more that he wanted for us. And then I connected this, the power of D&C 84, what the power of the Melchizedek priesthood really is, to my understanding of the rainbow and the frequencies of the rainbow, and the ability for this vessel, that understanding from college, helped me realize, oh, our body is like a radio. And then if it's tuned properly,
then it hits certain frequencies. Like already you can turn into certain stations. And what are the stations that we want to tune into? What are the promises that we can tune into? And so with that, everything that we're talking about on this channel is becoming a pure vessel that is in tune, back connected to the Father through Christ. And that he lays out that pattern to do that. So now taking the rainbow and applying it to that concept of how do we tune these colors in our body to be perfect harmony and frequency so that we produce white light. And well, the easy answer to that is the covenant path. And we talk a lot about that. Actually, I haven't pulled it up today. The temple diagram. I'm not even sure if I have it. We'll get into that in a minute here. But I believe that is a lot of what the Lord is doing. He's showing us the way to quite literally open the doors of heaven. And the covenant path helps us tune in until we are in line and perfect in Christ. And then beyond that, I don't know, Christ will have to teach us. So other things I began to learn over the last couple of years about the rainbow, and I won't, it started getting too long, but I won't get too in depth with, but something you can think of and ponder and pray with how you can maybe actually take some application into your life. I learned that each of your organs has frequencies. Everything, if you go back to one of the first videos, this is why I started with this, the video Science Proof God Exists. We talked a little bit there how everything is held together by vibration. And what is a vibration? It's word. God is the word. And so probably the next video I'll do will be on the word. So that'll give more depth to what we're going to talk about here. But the most fundamental unit of the universe in which we live, and that I can say that also attests to scripture, is word or vibration. Scientists have called vibration the most fundamental unit of the universe. It's what holds the vibrations, dependent on their state, will pull or repel atoms together. And those atoms are held dependent on the strength of the bond. And when the vibrational bond is cut, is the best way to say that, broken, it produces energy. And it's interesting, in working in chemistry for a long time, we're trying to get a chemical reaction to happen. One of the catalysts that we use a lot is UV light. We have to use light, and that can bond or break those vibrational bonds. And so, and maybe that makes light the most fundamental unit of the universe. I don't know, but lots of debate there. But essentially, the word, we're going to apply it to the word. And so we're made of all these elements, which are all held together by vibrational bonds. We're essentially made of word. We're made of word, and Christ was the word made flesh, and we are in the flesh from the word. And so you can think of the word as the spirit, that Christ then came to bring the word in the flesh. He was the word made flesh, who then came to bring the word, right? So we've fallen and coming back into the presence of God, and God tells us he is the word. And so we are essentially made of word, and that our behaviors kind of consume what the word written inside us is. And we're all translated incorrectly because of the fall. And so we're needing to be translated correctly. We're a living record. So these frequencies live within us. And so one thing I learned was that each organ in the body has a perfect resonance of which it should, or perfect frequency of which it should resonate for health. And that when those organs and things, they're all vibrating in their perfect state that they should be, and they all do that together, you get a perfect system of kinetics, like clockwork, and everything moves in its perfect order in its perfect time, for a healthy body and function. So relate that to the videos we did on time and moving like a solar system, everything in its perfect rhythm and time. Our bodies are also like that. So we can apply that before we applied that as like each of us is a being within, as we come into Zion, we are all in perfect order and harmony and time with each other. Still a lot of freedom of agency, but all within the laws and bounds of this higher order of the way that essentially the same order that the sun and the moon all work is the same order in which God works and commands everything. And so we're learning to come up to that order through the covenants we make. We're learning to be more harmonious and in order. But if we apply that to our body and our body, the physicality, we've talked a lot here on like the spirituality of that. And that spiritual then begets the physical. All things are created first spiritually and then temporal. And then Christ said, I've come to make things temporal then spiritual. And so there's a direct connection here between the physical. That's why for us in our religion, we see that the body is so important and is so key into godhood. And that's one thing that kind of separates us and makes us a little bit different than most mainstream Christianity. Is it's not one or the other, but together it makes the soul. We learn that in the Doctrine and Covenants, that it is the spirit and the body together create the soul. I used to think the spirit was the soul, but the scriptures clarify that it is both, that together that's the soul of man. And we need both. And so why Christ came and rose that flesh up. Something that I've been pondering a lot is the rising of that flesh that he gave us. That he has already done that. That was some of the changes that were made in the temple in regards to that resurrection. So think about that. And applying that here, everything in creation has its frequency. And I don't have all the answers, but one thing that really stood out to me in The Chosen was, I can't remember who the two were that were arguing in the show, but one, I think it was the zealot and probably Andrew. And they were arguing about like, well, it's spirit. Well, no, it's body or something. They were kind of like arguing those two. And the zealot's like, well, why don't you go eat a bunch of blueberry, or why don't you go eat a bunch of like poisonous berries and then tell me how your spirit feels, you know? And it was a good point. It's like we get too carried away in one or the other, and the two need to come in harmony. We're here to take the flesh and raise it to the level of the spirit. And you can't do that without spirit, but then you also can't continue forward without flesh. So it's like they are needed to become like God. And so finding the balance between the two. And so we've been given the word of wisdom. And what I find interesting at the beginning of the section where it discusses the word of wisdom is that this is given for the least saint. And so I take that to mean that like there's a whole lot more that he wants to give us in regards to what could be for our physical body and healing and the health of that. And I don't have all the answers, but I do find it interesting how much everything in our bodies have a capacity to hold light. We'll probably do a whole section on light and the cell's ability to handle light. And one theory in chemistry, quantum chemistry, is that you have these laws and bounds by which, that's what a quantum is. It's the amount of the capacity in which that space can hold. But at a higher law, capacity grows to be able to house more light and more bounds. And then an even higher law, more light and more bounds. So we'll probably save that for another time, but just keep that in mind with the body and the cell and plasma. And I think I already told the story once where I was pondering on light and plasma and the speed of light, and us literally being able to move at the speed of light and to house more light in this physical vessel. And that through the resurrection, we'll be able to, our bodies will rise to a higher level of the spirit. But right now in this state, they vibrate at a lower capacity, a smaller, a telestial bound. But in chemistry, it's possible for those electrons in that light to reach an excited state, which is a higher state of being. And it's like it's a totally different realm when you're dealing with molecules and light in that matter, in that capacity, I mean. And so the body's ability to transcend, I mean, I think that's quite literally what happens to these translated beings that we see, the three Nephites, John the Revelator, and those Moses, all who were translated, their bodies literally have reached a different state of being. And so that's just to me, like a really fascinating concept, that our bodies literally house frequency, and then would a higher version of that be a resurrection, a resurrected state, these three different levels of kingdoms that the body can achieve, and the physical ability for it to do that. So when I thought about that, I realized all the things in this world have vibration, energy, and frequency, and produce color and light. I started thinking a lot harder about the type of food I brought into my life. And, we have the word of wisdom for the leasing, but I felt like the Lord's like, you can do a lot more than, and be capable of a lot more physically, you don't have to say, oh, it's just about spirit, and then go eat a bunch of poison berries, and now your spirit is subject to those poison berries or to drugs or whatever. Same thing with the little choices we make every day with food and things, is that I can go to McDonald's and get a patty hamburger. There's some food that consumes energy, and there's some food that produces energy, versus a stick of celery growing from the house of my garden. My mind started to change, this literally, you are what you eat. And how does that affect the kinetics of my body? And then how does that then affect my ability as a vessel to take in higher capacity of hearing, to tune better? I would go in high school, I would eat a cinnamon roll every day, because they had these big cinnamon rolls at school. I'm sure my mom would be horrified if she knew that, but I think I told her that. I was a swimmer, so I was super hungry all the time and just wanted straight calories, carbs. So it worked at the time, but I would go in class, I couldn't function. I said it before, I failed high school chemistry. I don't remember a thing from high school. I could not retain information. I was falling asleep all the time. I just was not in a good state. I thought I was stupid. I just felt like I couldn't keep up. Versus now, I feel like the things I'm learning, I've never had more energy in my life. Keeping up with my kids, and I'm not like a young 20-year-old mom. I'm in my older 30s, and so having kids young, so it's and yet I feel so much better than I ever did before. I used to need naps during the day. I don't need naps. I have steady, constant energy. I don't use caffeine at all. It's this huge change in my life by realizing I got rid of as much. I'm not saying you have to pray about what you feel, but I just applying these concepts made me realize how important this body is. I just found that as I read the Book of Mormon, I felt like the Lord is the master physician. And as I read the Book of Mormon and the scriptures, there would be things that would stand out to me with this new understanding of the body connecting back to its maker. And I would see things I didn't see, and then I would feel impressed to change things in my diet or my ways of eating or the way I took care of my body that seemed insignificant to me before. I remember years ago, I was struggling with just the energy, and I just didn't feel good. And I just did not feel good in my body. I just couldn't keep up with life. And I just felt so drained all the time. And this was a long time ago, when I was in college. And I remember coming home for the weekend, and my brother's scriptures were on the couch And this is before I knew any of this stuff. But my brother's scriptures were on the couch. And for some reason, I just opened it and looked. And in the beginning, he had some like a quote tape from somebody. And it said, if you feel like you're off in any way in life, and gave a whole list of things, areas you could feel off in. And one of them was like health and diet and wellness. And if you felt off in any of that, then I can't remember the quote, it was so long ago, but the message was essentially, you do not have your priorities in order. And that felt like an answer to me at the time. I went home and went back to college and tried to get my priorities in order. Actually stopped exercising so much. And I started just focusing on the gospel more. And then it felt like everything started to fall into place a little bit better. And my desires to eat giant bowls of cereal kind of, it's just, I noticed a change. I noticed a physical change in my body. But that's another part of D&C 84 is the promise of a physical change in the body. And President Nelson, I think his wife, Wendy, after these years, when he told us to study all this and all this was happening to me, somebody asked, how can he do what he does at 98 years old or however old he was at the time? And she said, he has had a renewal of his body. And that hit me so hard because that was she used the exact wording from D&C 84, which is one of the promises of the Melchizedek priesthood, a renewal of the body. And I have felt that way in many ways. And like I said, I think it's a promise of these kinds. It's a promise of what the token of the rainbow is, to reunite us back eventually with the city of Enoch. Will be like them, but it's this process of becoming. And as we do so, I feel this steady flow of energy that I never felt before in my body. And small changes like cutting things out, putting things, I don't know. Most of it has come from, I'm reading the scriptures and something stood out to me. And like, I felt like he was literally writing me a prescription for my own body, saying, stop doing this, start doing this. Stop. Just as I'm trying to read, it just began to make sense, just impressed on me because we're connecting. We've got the right things in order. It's not 6, it's 7. It's not, as things get back in their proper order, music and, anyway, I'm going on a tangent here, but like everything's a little off in this world. But as we work in our own personal life to put things back in, and that's what that quote was saying, like you're kind of out of order. You feel like these things are getting out of control in your life. Like we're in chaotic state. We got to come back into the order of God. We got to start getting everything you can in any way. Let him guide you. It's not going to be the same answer for everyone, but let him guide you. And just look at that covenant path. Just look at that temple diagram and say, in this thing in my life, where am I? Where am I at with that? This thing itself, it might be in this spot. Maybe I'm just at the repentance stage of this thing. And then I got to go to the law of sacrifice and the law of, and keep going, gospel, and keep going there. But that's what he wants to do. He wants to restore order to you. And that promise, I feel like I cannot emphasize what President Nelson said in D&C 84 when he said, read that. I keep telling people, read it. No, if you don't get it, read it again. If you don't get it, and I don't even get it, I keep reading it. I'm like, oh, every time there's something new. And I think we really are only catching like a little percent of what he's really offering right now. So I think that the light in the body is extremely important, to not just say, well, I used to think like, well, I don't want to live a life and not enjoy sugar and all that stuff. I was a sugaraholic. Another problem I had. But then once I started to realize what that was really doing to my body and my bloodstream, which was then throwing all the rest of the kinetics off. Luckily, I studied a lot of this, so it makes easier sense to me. But Tad's mom, my husband's mom, would always say, sugar is like the poison of your body. And I was like, yeah, but what is a life without it? But when I really began to like understand the promise the Lord is giving to the point that I actually have hope in it, I started looking at my body different. I started looking at it as a vessel and to keep it as healthy and strong as possible. And what's interesting is that as I put my trust in him and guided him, I don't even have those cravings anymore. It's like it's been removed so much. I mean, there's still things I'm working to get over. Soda is a big one for me. That's been the hardest one. But it's just it's really set for me. It's just really set things. I don't know. I have a strong testimony that he will help guide you into. It's like the guy said in The Chosen, like, well, if you keep poisoning your body, how good is your spirit? And with that, I stopped eating McDonald's hamburgers. So, but I can't deny it now. And it's kind of, we went to Lagoon yesterday and I was eating chicken strips and fries, and I realized I'm like, I used to love fry sauce. It was just like down, I could drink fry sauce and just the grease. And I realized I'm like, it does not make me feel good. And my daughter had a thing of grapes there. And I'm like, wow, I've become a person who wants the light. I don't want the breaded, like I want the thing that has light. It's like natural for me to, I look at that the way I used to look at chocolate. I look at grapes now the way I used to look at chocolate. Occasionally I still have the big chocolate cravings, but compared to what I was, it's like I look at the grapes and I'm like, I told my husband, how come all I really want right now? I thought I wanted this greasy food, but all I want right now is those grapes. But I think I'm reprogramming my mind. I'm realizing the importance of light, and I've grown such a passion for growing my own food. Oh man, one day we'll get in a conversation of that, but I think there's such a power God gives you in even your own homegrown food that is not the same light as the processes, the way the world goes through. And so I just feel like a renewal of my body as I do as much as I can to let him continue to fill my body with light, and give up as much of the world's ways as I can for his ways. And his ways are creation. That's what God is. He's trying to connect us back to creation. So as much creation as I can do to participate in those things, creating my own garden, to help recreate my vessel and my children's vessel is to me become really important. Changing the music we listen to. So again, we're going to switch topics here a little bit, but it does affect your body. They've always told you, pay attention to the music you listen to. So many studies now. You don't even have to, there's so many studies out there now that certain frequencies have healing effects on your body. And there's so much research out there, you can find it, but it's like, yeah, they've been telling us that for forever. And I just think that like with the rest, we attribute so much to like, oh, people are living longer now than they did in Joseph Smith time because of modern day science. And I think that's hogwash. I think people are living longer now because the gospel was restored. Men's minds are being enlightened, which then brings about things. But it also enlightens people to live certain ways too. And so you're getting both. We're getting more cancer and more problems than we've ever seen at the same time, anxiety, depression, things that we've ever seen at the same time. We're getting people lifespan living longer. And so, it is a time for both, unfortunately, as we head into Christ's coming. We're going to have the turmoil on both, but the promise is clear. What he's offering to me, it seems very clear. And so, okay. One of the other things I want, okay, so that's music is literally get rid of the rock and roll music. That's another thing I did in my life. We got rid of it. We got rid of TV, anything that was producing low frequency vibrations, keeping us bound in a certain realm of existence, a telestial world realm. Do we just cut all that? Once we had this understanding and a true hope and what Christ is offering, we nixed all that. And we've moved towards thinking the things of a higher world, which again is what the prophet has guided us to do. So what does that actually mean? In my Father's house are many mansions, what the Lord told us. A non-member friend of mine sent me something where he doesn't know much about our belief in different kingdoms, but he believes that in states of mind, in the state of the mind, and that reflects on the body. And so we talked about that. And I said, well, think of the kingdoms then as these different frequencies and vibrations in which you're bound. Certain frequencies in a telestial and a terrestrial and a celestial. Certain foods have a telestial vibration, a terrestrial vibration, and a celestial vibration. They produce different levels of light, or they consume light in different ways. Consume energy from you. And when you eat something, it's taking all your energy, or it's giving you energy and light. And so you kind of become, between the spirit and the body, you kind of become united in that way. And so so we talked about that, the different levels and of light, and I don't remember my point of saying that, but that's kind of the way I look at it now. These different worlds have different bounds, and different laws that you have to abide by to enter certain realms, and a purity of light you have to enter the next level or realm. And so, okay, moving on to another symbolism of 7 that I have found, and I don't have all the answers here because I'm not a part of any of these cultures or the world. I've taken some world religion classes where they kind of show you how similar things are. I've worked with a lot of people from different cultures. One day I was at work when I was in college, and one of the other chemists was telling me, he was from India, worked with a lot of people from India and Iran at that job. And this guy was telling us about, you guys believe in Noah's Ark, and we believe that there was a fox god who cried over the wickedness of the world, and he flooded the world. And I thought, well, that's it. Yeah, it's like kind of the same story. Everybody has some sort of unity of truth somehow, and there's just these it's just been skewed a little, and you can think about the Tower of Babel, where it was like, yeah, we were all one language, and then we all got separated, and then how we describe things got all weird. And that's what Christ came to do, to restore it all. We know the tribes got scattered and went all different directions. We know in our day, the greatest work we can participate in is the restoration of that. And so I don't have all the answers, but I think a lot of that movie, I can find symbolism in anything. And we've cut out most movies, but we watched the movie Raya with our daughter. It was a Disney movie, and I thought it was really interesting that what happened to these people is they were all united in one, and then they all got scattered because they kind of like turned on each other, and they all got scattered into these different nations, like 7 nations, and then or 7 continents. And I think they even got moved out of place. And then in the end, it's kind of their journey. They're fighting with each other, and they all see things different. Like, oh no, it's this. Oh, it's this. It's that. And then somebody has to come and like help unite them all back in one. And I'm pretty sure there's like a crystal as the symbol of the center or something. I'm like, okay, that's in the end, we only know one story. We only know how to tell one story because we're children of God. And Christ is that way. Now, we all may have different ideas of that, but of who that figure is. But there's only one who came and atoned for the sin of the world. This world, just a disclaimer here before I go into any of this, because we're going to talk about some other cultures. What I learned about a covenant is that you have to cut a covenant by blood. The law of this world is blood. And there's a scripture that says we'll be judged by three witnesses that will judge against us: blood, water, and spirit. And I think about that, each of those are intelligence systems: blood, water, and spirit. And the ability to generate and recreate, like the blood, the coding
of the DNA can change based off choice, can change in generations. That's the study of epigenetics right now. So we see in this world that that's the law of this world blood. And so Christ had to come do that and atone with his blood so that we could then have the water and the spirit, the living water and the spirit. And he in order, like, for a covenant back in ancient days, for a covenant to be a legit covenant, that had to be cut in blood. They called it cutting a covenant. So you had to spill blood to get a covenant. So Christ is the only of all the gurus in the world that have ever been. Christ is the only one who cut the covenant, and died in that way for the sins of the world to buy us back. So, but it does seem like there's a lot of coincidental truths where we all might merge and just kind of come back as a whole. I think Eller, Holland, or Uchtdorf, one of them gave the symbol of like an elephant, and somebody's over here touching the tail saying it's a snake, and somebody's over here touching the trunk saying it's something else, and somebody's touching the foot. And in the end, they're all touching an elephant, but they're all seeing it in a different perspective. Again, the symbol of that perception. And so Christ is what really gives us the covenants with Christ, really give us the center and source of true perception, which is God. So with the scattering, and I ponder on this so much. This interests me. I don't have any answers, but we know that we're all going to be gathered back together. Those tribes have been lost. They have truths. Everybody has truths. Otherwise, we would have all destroyed each other by now and been like the Jaredites and completely obliterated. So there's things that are guiding people and holding them wherever they are. And there's so many things that I think shed more light. I think it was Eller Uchtdorf said, we said something like, we're not the keepers of all truths. Bring your truths and add them to us. Like, we're restoring the truth. And so one that stood out to me when I learned about the rainbow was a lot of the Chinese Eastern traditions are that you have 7 main energy centers in the body, and they relate each one to a color and frequency of resonation with the rainbow. And there's 7. And so you start from red. And what's really fascinating to me is green is the heart. And so I feel like you could completely map that out on that temple diagram. You could completely map out the body as the temple on there, and then bringing more light into the body as a vessel. And so they call them these energy systems and the chakras. And I think there's a lot more. Light and energy are not the same thing, is where I think people get confused. People always talk about energy as if it's light, but it's equals MC squared. So light is the constant there, and energy and matter are relative. It's a theory of relativity, relative dependent on the speed of light. So just keep that in mind, that we're energy and light, we're talking about 2 different things here. But I just thought that was really fascinating. There's 7. This is a token. To me, it's a token of what the rainbow, what he's saying here is, this is a token that you'll become like the city of Enoch, because it's D&C 84. You have a renewal of the body. We'll be like them. It's a token of the renewal of the body in a way. And seeing what the Eastern cultures, which is like the one culture that we have not been able to really bring the gospel fully to, I mean, through other means, but it's been a hard one to get in to that culture there. And I just think, what's going to happen to the world when we can combine any truths that are found there? I've had some friends who have served in Eastern cultures, and they talk about all their symbolisms, and you see it in the temples. Go to the Bountiful Temple, you'll see the yin yang sign in there, and what that represents, and the truth of what that represents. There's a falsehood to everything, but it's just when you take the truths that everyone has and we just focus on that and apply it, we get a bigger picture. And so that's something I thought was really interesting, was they have those 7. Okay. And then in the Hindu religion, one of their main themes is the tree of life. That's a big symbol for them. And they make these trees of life and they put all the colors of the rainbows in them. And it's kind of symbolic of the genealogy, their ancestors and things in that tree of life. Like, okay, well, that really fits with us. And again, they have that symbol of 7. So the Eastern culture and the 7 in the body, and then the Hindu, they have the 7. And so they actually have, like, again, I don't know a ton about it, but the basis of what I have is it's kind of foundational. There's like 10 main, like what we would call ordinances. And they have like 10, but then the top 3 are broken down into 3 of the others. So then it is like a total of 7. And then the tree of life being the main symbol and the rainbow within the tree. And I'm like, what? Like, now that I've seen what the rainbow really means, it is helping me identify these cultures as when all these tribes come and all their gifts, like it's just going to blow open. And that's the exponential process of all truth. As they combine it into the doctrine of Christ, as we take all that and combine it into the doctrine of Christ, that and I have this belief that that's what John the Revelator is doing. You know, he was sent to kind of commission over the Gentiles and restoring them back in, which we are the Gentiles. And like, what does he get to engage in? Like, helping guide these people, and all these people were scattered, but they're coming back in. So what have they kept all this time that has maybe been diluted or softened or translated a little bit wrong or whatever? That when we only have what we have the doctrine in its full translation. So come add it all in, and what expansion is that going to give for humanity? And that's where I think of it as Rhea. Like, we're all fighting with each other right now, these nations. But once we piece it all back together, total restoration. And so just seeing the similarities of, there's some truth that has been kept there. And then there's the 7 main ordinances in Christianity. And we've got baptism, the sacrament, and then the washing, clothing, anointing, endowment, and sealing. And that is, again, just the 7 of what we know for, I think there's more beyond that. Christ obviously shows us there's a higher ordinance as he washes his disciples' feet, but those to becoming perfect in Christ, I don't know. There's so much we don't. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. But it just like, okay, there's some symbolism, some patterns here that it's going to be great when it all comes back in together. And again, that when the truth is restored, that we'll look up and they'll look down. And to me, that 7 is such a powerful symbol of truth restored. It is a symbol of perfection, who is the being of perfection, that is Christ, and he is the truth, the way, and the life. Let me see if I can pull up that symbol diagram here, and we'll just quickly I don't have it up. Sorry, I'm not as prepared today. Maybe I can draw real quick. Okay, we've got, this is really bad drawing. Okay, we have, this is the holy place. This is the Holy of Holies. And then anybody who's been following would know this is the laver of water. This is the altar of sacrifice. And then this is the door by which you enter, and then the outer court. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, and so you kind of enter here. And so a couple things you could map out here. I just think, Christ is the heart. So if you were to even apply that into Eastern culture, the heart is the chakra in which everything kind of changes. And we've talked about it as its own intelligence system. In fact, this is something that really stood out to me. I think you can map every dispensation here. I'm not going to do that, but I will point out, if you were to map the 7 dispensations of the 7,000 years, even, you get in the meridian of time, in the 4th, you get the opening, you get Christ, you get the temple being rent open. So these are the stage of Christ right here. This is the terrestrial sphere. Sorry. But this is the terrestrial sphere, which is Christ. This would be the Holy Ghost. This would be God the Father, and then Christ connecting it all. And in the meridian of time, God's heart, everybody needs a broken heart and contrite spirit. And when Christ died on the cross, that veil being open, that heart being open, was like God's heart breaking, and which literally opened the way for all of us. It was God manifest in the flesh and his heart breaking so that we could go all the way through. I just think that is a beautiful symbolism there. And then you get that 7th chakra, which they talk about it's the 6th. Because if you go read this in the seals and the dispensations, Joseph Smith restored, it's like the enlightenment phase. And so that's kind of the last phase of spiritual growth for the Eastern culture, is enlightenment. And that third eye we've talked about, or the all-seeing eye, which is that connection back to the Father, from the heart back up, and from Christ back to the Father. And that is the stage, the era of enlightenment. And who opened that dispensation? That was Joseph Smith. And so you can get all the prophets of the dispensations lined out in the pattern of 7. And I haven't actually sat down and done that, but there's a few of them that have stood out to me that, like, yeah, I think you could do that. I think you could really see from the baptism of water in Noah's era to the baptism of Christ here, back to enlightenment in your own spiritual path, and ascending that ladder, ascension of 7. And that every culture has some sort of ascension of 7 and that ladder. Isaiah is a great way to, let's see, go through that ascension, or to understand more. He gives it in context with new names and things, which we then apply to the temple. So I think that's mostly where I'm going to stop today. I could go on forever about, I'm just trying to think if I got everything I was going to talk about. I mean, I could go way deeper into just, I've always had a passion for, like, when I was in college, my electives I would take would be like biochem and nutrition. And I've always had an interest in the body, and then applying what I learned in quantum chem to the body, I realized they were one and the same. And the body without the spirit without the body, they're required for Godhead. And it's just, of course he would make it that way. We've been taught that, but it just brings so much more understanding to me. So in the end, I think the rainbow is very important for these reasons in God, in what he is promising we can become, and to make sure we use that symbol properly. And to me, it's a token for Enoch. It's a token for what we can become to Enoch. And so I would love to just expand on that more and more. I'm just going to leave it at that and let you ponder on that. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. I think the next time, probably what makes the most sense based off this conversation will be to go into the word and the correct translation of the word, and being that you are made of word and in the flesh like Christ, and trying to come back to a correct translation of word within us, how that applies to also the promised blessing of Enoch, and with the word. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Okay. Hi, jumping back on here, I realized that I forgot to say something I was going to talk about and was kind of an important part of this video. So new day, new outfit, no makeup. It's a Monday, Mom Monday, so rather than a Sunday. So what I wanted to say was in relation to the promise of D&C 84 of hearing him and seeing him. And we talked about the first vision a little bit. So I wanted to relate the light in the rainbow and kind of Enoch coming before the flood, Joseph Smith coming before the fire, and how light and that fire are kind of that same thing. And so, and the rainbow and water are kind of together. And then, I mean, the symbolism here of the water, the refraction of the water gives you the first rainbow, and then the reflection of that gives you the second rainbow. And so we move from water to fire through this medium of light. And so with that, in relation to seeing him and hearing him, and what is the promised blessing of this time in preparation for the fire to come, is the vessels of light and the glory that essentially is the fire that is all consuming, and being able to be a part with him in that, and the vessel being with him in that reflection of his light. And so, and all the angels will come with him. And a friend pointed out to me that she had never realized that it says all of his angels. And I had never realized that either. So that's a hefty promise as well. So what does that mean for us now? And back to D&C 84, which I love so much, the relation of seeing and then hearing him. In a previous video, I talked a little bit about, I had watched this science-y video, and they were talking about the body's ability to hear sound in a way that is, the frequencies of which we can hear are more vast than the frequencies of which we can see. And so as our bodies are able to attune to a higher dimension of hearing, like hearing him, which was a call from our prophet, being able to hear on that spiritual level, that the body then in time, the vision then catches up. This is kind of what that sciencey video I was watching. Don't ask me where it was, because I watch all these things and I don't know where they came from. I just remember what stands out to me. But essentially, like, is your if they can fix the ability to hear better, the vision and how they're connected. So the idea behind this discovery was that as the ability to hear expands, eventually the spectrum on which we can see then expands. And so if you take that in context with spiritual hearing, and then the spectrum of light of which we can see, that expands. So then you get the priesthood power to hear and then see, D&C 84, Melchizedek priesthood. And this was, somebody sent me a video yesterday, just after I finished recording, that I'm like, I'm gonna have to include that. We might have to do a totally different video on this, but the pure light, the way that pure light moves through different types of stones, it actually discounted the light of the diamond, that all the stones that are shown in the New Jerusalem and in the book of Revelations, the way they take on, I can't remember different types of light, but like essentially when pure light is added to them, they magnify and are beautiful, versus the type of stones that we're more interested in here, like diamonds, that when you put pure light through them, you get this, I can't remember what they called it. Anyway, you get an effect that actually turns them black. So like a diamond in a celestial realm would actually be black versus one of the types of stones that are in the book of Revelation. So if anybody wants the thing I saw in that, I posted it on my Facebook, but I'll do a whole different video on light itself, but I think that's really fascinating, this capacity of light and us growing into a more purified light and being able to receive a more purified light, beginning with our ability to hear him. And then if you plug that in on the temple diagram, I think we talked about that in recent videos. So when you enter that holy place, you're in that Melchizedek. You had the Aaronic priesthood and then the Melchizedek and then the patriarchal order. That Melchizedek phase, hear him, see him. You're moving from the capacity where your range is expanding to be able to hear on a higher spiritual level. And that spectrum is growing until you can see on a higher spectrum, on a higher spiritual level, and receive a higher, fuller, more pure light. Because you're moving out of the telestial. You're not here. It's like you're shining like a diamond, but that wouldn't be the same in the celestial. It would be you would have a different ability to receive light and more pure light. So hopefully that makes any sort of sense. The other thing I was going to share was this. I was sharing this experience with the rainbow, the group at a Christmas party. While I'm sharing it, this guy, he pulls out a picture of a rainbow his friend had taken. And while I'm talking, and then he just holds it. And it's a picture. I guess his friend had been hiking out of Zion and somewhere out there and came across this tree and this rainbow going over it. And it's a phenomenal picture and had a similar experience. And so he had shared that picture with his friend, and his friend then shared it with me. And I'm like, can you ask if I can use that picture? So that's one that's also in my opening little video, and I'll share it again. But it's just, again, was another witness of a lot of people are having these type of experiences and feeling like they mean something. And so anyway, so I'll leave it there, and till next time, thanks for watching.